Hola, yo, ¿qué tal? Bien. Bueno, bienvenidos todos todas a esta última sesión del Cinema Philosophicum. Pido disculpas por no haber podido asistir por mi parte a las otras sesiones, pero no ha sido imposible. Sí quería agradecer a Nicolás y a Antonio la confianza y a Erika, obvio. Y bueno, me toca presentar a alguien que para mí, bueno, es un honor realmente. I wish you understood this. Para mí es un honor absoluto presentar a Aline. La admiro profundamente. Ella es maestra de conferencias en artes y filosofía en la Universidad Toulouse-Jean Jaurès. Co-dirige el máster de allí de filosofía contemporánea. Es miembro del grupo de investigación RAFIS. Y bueno, no os voy a hacer toda la lista de publicaciones porque voy a hacer un poco ruido de las cosas que a mí más me interesan que hace ella. Ella es miembro desde el 2023, se llaman miembro junior del Instituto de, ¿cómo lo llaman? Del Institut Universitaire de France, y tiene un proyecto de investigación que se llama Résister à la sidération, contribución de l'esthétique philosophique aux humanités écologiques, que es como resistir a la sideración, a la parálisis, no sé cómo se traduce al castellano, contribuciones de la estética filosófica a las humanidades ecológicas. Espero que luego hablemos algo de todo esto, no solo de Deleuze y el cine, que es lo que nos convoca aquí. Y bueno, entre sus publicaciones que decir, tiene su primer libro en Le World Nuevo, es en realidad la forma libro de su tesis, que es, como lo tenemos por aquí, sí. Sens de articulación, sí. Sens de la défiguración, quatre propositions entre théâtre et philosophie. Aquí hace un popurrí entre Müller, Pasolini, Beckett y Deleuze, Foucault, Soriot y Lacour. Bueno, filósofos contemporáneos todos. Y luego tiene un libro en el que participa gente que yo admiro muchísimo, entre ellos mi autor de tesis, Bruno Latour, que es el libro que le sale en Brown, es del 2016, creo. El libro es Soriot. Etienne Soriot y une ontologie de la restauración, del 2015, perdón. Y bueno, luego tiene pues, publicaciones en revistas más top, en inglés, en francés. En la revista Deleuze Studies tiene un número especial, ¿no? Sobre Deleuze, la ética, la dramatización. Bueno, no voy a extender demasiado. Pero, ¿qué decir? De sus trabajos, digamos, de lo que a mí más me... Es miembro del equipo de investigación, fue miembro del equipo de investigación del proyecto ERC, An Inquiry into the Existence de Bruno Latour. En la actualidad es miembro del grupo de estudios constructivistas de Bruselas con Isabel Stenges y Didier Deleuze. Es miembro del colectivo Rivage, que quizás hablemos algo de esto. Son colectivos que tratan precisamente de aunar prácticas ciudadanas, estética, política. Bueno, espero que lo vamos a hablar más de esto. Y ella es miembro ella es quien lleva el proyecto, los ateliers UATERI, que es el último proyecto que dejó Bruno Latour precisamente de investigación ciudadana. Ella es la directora científica de este proyecto en Toulouse. No me quería preguntarle en las preguntas al respecto. Poco más que añadir, solo presentarla. Ella acaba de publicar justo Revenir d'entre les morts, que es bueno, Volver entre los muertos, Deleuze y la creencia en este mundo, en el cine y en las series. Creo que es un poco difícil de conseguir ahora mismo en España, pero está genial. Y su conferencia tiene muy parecido el título, ¿no? Coming Back from the Dead, Cinema and the Belief in This World.
Muchas gracias, Buenaventura, and muchas gracias, Nicolas and Antonio, for inviting me with such a warm welcome. And I'm really, really sorry I'm not able to give this talk in Spanish. But believe me, it's for the best, because it would be horrible if I were reading like a ChatGPT version of what Spanish should sound like. So sorry, I will be speaking in English and basically presenting my book, whatever there's some words about. I have a copy here, so maybe you can have a look at it while I'm speaking. It's in French. Beware. So, this book was born out of an obsession that I had with a quote by Deleuze that is quite famous across the Deleuzians. It's the first sentence in the first passage of the handout. The modern fact is that we no longer believe in this world. I have been obsessed with this sentence for years. I think because the first time we read or hear this sentence, we get it. But we get it at an instinctive level. We get that it's about us. But we cannot explain it analytically so easily that we get it. Because believing is often believing in another world, be it religious or political, utopias, and so on. But this world is supposed to be a given, a datum. So that's interesting for me that we understand the sentence at an instinctive level, but not immediately at a rationalistic level. So, yeah, the first impulse of this book was to dive deeper into this quote and see what we can do with it. And obviously, I was interested by the fact that the modern fact is connected to modern cinema, and that the fact that we no longer believe in this world is a key to understand what the specificity of modern cinema as it is developed in the time image cinema too. But when I began writing my book, I came to realize that to give a full account of what the phrase means at philosophical, aesthetical, and political levels, and to go beyond the usual comments about this phrase, I had to connect it with another idea that, in my view, is key to Deleuze's thought about cinema, but that is way less talked about. The idea that cinema has to come back from the dead. And it's something, if you read Deleuze and pay close attention to the text, it's a phrase, coming back from the dead, that Deleuze uses discreetly but importantly in an atheist sense. It's not Jesus Christ coming back from the dead. But it's way less commented upon. And it seemed to me that to really understand the phrase "the modern fact" is that we no longer believe in this world, we have to connect it to this idea that cinema, and not only cinema, we will talk about that, has to come back from the dead. And this idea, you will find it in the letter Deleuze wrote to French critic Serge Danet, that Antonio, for what I could understand, referred to yesterday evening. And it's the second quote on your handout. Deleuze writes to Danet, so it's a letter, but it's a letter that will be the preface to a book published by Danet, and it's a letter that comes out 1 year after the release of the time image, so it's really close. You have some phrasing that are identical to the time image, but from another focus or viewpoint. And so you can see the first sentence of quote 2 on the handout is Deleuze writing Danet. Now you've pointed out that this form of cinema, so classical cinema, didn't die a natural death, but was killed in the war. That is an idea that always comes back in Deleuze writing. There are no natural death. There are only assassinations. And classical cinema, the movement image, was murdered by the compromission of Hollywood and fascism. We talked about it earlier in the conference. But so what interests me is let's say about 10 lines further in quote 2 of the handout. Deleuze writes to Danet, and if cinema was to revive after the war, it would have to be based on new principles, a new function of the image, a new politics, a new artistic finality. René's work is perhaps the greatest, the most symptomatic example of this. He brings cinema back from the dead. So you see, I didn't invent this way. I give proof, I give repeat. Deleuze uses those words to talk about modern cinema. And what interests me further is that in his letter to Serge Danet, Deleuze points out that coming back from the dead is the very gesture cinema had to make after World War II. But it's a gesture cinema always has to make. At every time, cinema has to come back from the dead in the sense of remaining socially, politically relevant compared to other media. And in the letters to Serge Danet, as we are in the 80s, the main concern is television. Will television suppress the political, aesthetical, social efficacy of cinema? It was a true danger. Today, obviously, Deleuze already mentions in the 80s the digital images, but just the beginning. And today, question, is cinema still creative, relevant art form at a social, political, and aesthetical level remains to question when we are always doom scrolling on our phones. And it's an idea that you find in Deleuze's book. Of course, there will always be cinema and some enthusiastic cinephile going to the movies. But cinema is a mass medium. Cinema doesn't make sense if you don't connect it to the fact that it is a mass medium. So if the masses lose their interest in cinema, it becomes dead. And so the question of coming back from the dead is always a new question and always a gesture that cinema must reinvent, facing the new media of its time. So the departure point of my book is that the bewilderment, so the sidération. I don't know if there is a Spanish translation for this word. I discovered there is no for in English. So, well, sidération in French is a beautiful word, and we can talk about it during the Q&A if you wish. But it means shock and bewilderment, and this, you're like a rabbit at night in front of the light of a car. You just cannot act anymore, and you can even have a fascination from the images of destruction, collapse, and so on. So yeah, sidération points to all of that. And I think that cinema, and today some TV series that are not purely written by an algorithm according to the taste of the viewers and so on, but creative moving images, at least, still have this gesture of coming back from the dead to resist sidération. And I think that to understand this gesture, we have to connect it to the idea of believing in this world, since it is the very task of modern cinema for Deleuze. In the first quote of your handout, you have this passage by Deleuze. The cinema must film not the world, but belief in this world, our only link. The nature of cinematographic illusion has often been considered. Restoring our belief in this world, this is the power of modern cinema when it stops being bad and good. And I just say one word of this: when it stops being bad. Deleuze says in the cinema books that 90% of cinematographic production is bad, and it's just a repetition of cliches. And he says that's a true problem for a mass medium, but there is so much to say about the 1% of good production that will focus on that. Deleuze is not fond of just critical insight. And that's basically the same approach I took in my book. But still, we still have to have in mind that, well, 99% of the production of cinema or TV series is bad. So, all of that is basically the starting point of my book. And in what follows, I intend to present my thought more precisely by following two axes. First, I'll dig deeper into this connection between believing in this world and coming back from the dead. And second, I reflect on what watching some movies and TV series through the lens of coming back from the dead made me see and think, or another manner of presenting the second part of my talk is I give you a presentation of the chapters. So let's begin with how believing in this world is connected to the idea of coming back from the dead. And to present that, I go back to a sentence that you can find quote 2 of your handout, so the letter to Sardane, where Deleuze writes about cinema coming back from the dead after World War II. And if cinema was to revive after the war, it would have to be based on new principles, a new function of the image, a new politics, a new artistic finality. So I based what I'm saying on these three ideas: a new function of the image, a new politic, a new artistic finality. But it would be too easy to take these 3 points in order, so let's begin with the new artistic finality. What is the new artistic finality of cinema coming back from the dead after World War II? I argue that we can understand this new artistic finality at an aesthetical level, because when Deleuze writes about the modern fact that we no longer believe in the world, it seems to me that the sentences that immediately follow alludes to the quite famous amongst Deleuzians question of cliché and the realm of the kingdom of cliché we are in. Just after writing about the modern fact in Cinema 2, Deleuze writes, so it's still the first quote on your handout, we do not even believe in the events which happens to us, love, death, as if they only half concerned us. It is not we who make cinema, it is the world which looks like a bad film. Godard said about Bonaparte, these are people who are real, and it's the world that is a breakaway group. So it's, qui fait Bonaparte in French. It is the world that is making cinema for itself. It is the world that is out of sync. They, the characters in Bonaparte, they are right, they are true, they represent life, they live a simple story. It is the world around them which is living a bad script. In French, it is un mauvais film. So, if you are familiar with Cinema 2, it seems to me that this passage about we don't even believe in the events that happen to us, like love, death, and so on, for me it's clearly connected to the question of the kingdom of cliché. We encounter both at the end of Cinema 1, the movement image, and in Cinema 2, the time image. Deleuze says, cinema maybe in some instances comes back from the dead after World War II, but it's a real battle because it doesn't only mean finding a new social, political relevance and getting rid of the fascist conformation of classical cinema. It also means that we are in a world where images are multiplying everywhere, and Deleuze writes that in the 80s, but think of all the images we can scroll on our smartphone screen endlessly today. We live in a world where images are everywhere in every direction. It's not just only the frontality, the verticality of the movie screen. images everywhere, but it's as if it half concerned us. And I think that's a point you don't even need Deleuze to get it. We see so many images of disasters, of catastrophes that we just rationally think, well, that's awful, and then we think about something else. It doesn't concern us like it should. And that's exactly the definition of cliches that Deleuze gives at the beginning of the time image. He says, cliches are sensory motor schemata that allow us to only perceive a small part of things, only perceive what we are interested in, and not the whole thing. When I teach Cinema 2 to my students, I usually give an awful but telling example of usually on your way from home or hotel to go to this room, you have encountered someone asking for money and sleeping in the streets. Best case scenario, you give a piece of money. Worst case scenario, you just avoid seeing that person. And in a way that is normal. If every time you encounter deep misery, you have to take it all in, you cannot live. You have to use cliches and sensory motor schemata to navigate life. Otherwise, you end up like the characters in Roberto Rossellini's movies. You're struck by the beauty of the misery of the world, and you cannot act anymore. You can get yourself locked up in an asylum. You cannot, at every minute of your life, absorb everything that is too beautiful, too awful. You need some cliches. You need to reduce some things you encounter according to, and I'm reading from quote 3 on the handout, according to your economic interest, your ideological beliefs, and psychological demands. So, some cliches are not only normal, but needed to navigate life. Our contemporary, or to speak as Deleuze, our modern problem is that cliches have become hegemonic. We encounter only cliches, and it has become a rare event when something managed to break through the screen of cliché. Pun intended, I just came up with that. So it seems to me that the new artistic finality of image when cinema comes back from the dead after World War II is to break through the screen of cliches, which is obviously an aesthetical task. And as Natalia talked about earlier in the afternoon, it's something that's really, really clear in Godard's cinema. The interval, the unlinked images are a way to make us think and see beyond cliches. But I think we cannot disconnect the aesthetical part of the question of cliches with the political and existential parts of it. Sometimes Deleuze uses the terms zombies. I don't know how to say that in English, but as we are French and Spanish speaker, zombie. Sometimes Deleuze says in the cinema books, but in other texts too, that we have become zombies. We are living dead. We are alive, but not really, because we are just engulfed in clichés. So there is a political and existential dimension to the question of cliché, and that's something you can find, for instance, in quote 4 on the handout, and I like it. I will read it. It's a passage quite famous too about the critique of modern society and social democracies. Human rights say nothing about the immanent modes of existence of people provided with rights, nor is it only in the extreme situation described by Primo Levi that we experience the shame of being human. We also experience it in insignificant conditions before the meanness and vulgarity of existence that owns, still a thing of ghosts, that owns democracies, for the propagation of its modes of existence not thought for the market, and for the values, ideals, and opinions of our time. The ignominy of the possibilities of life that we are offered appear from within. We do not feel ourselves outside of our time, but continue to undergo shameful compromises with it. This feeling of shame is one of philosophy's most powerful motives. So you see the question of going beyond clichés is an aesthetical question, but not only. It's only the task of philosophy to see through the clichés, the why do you complain, you're living in a democracy, you have rights, and so on. It's a aesthetical, political, and existential question. So, at this point, it's clear the new artistic finality of cinema Deleuze talks about in the letter to Sardane is breaking clichés at both aesthetic and existential levels. So, let's now talk about another new principle of modern cinema when it comes back from the dead. Deleuze says there is a new function of the image. I will tackle this part at a philosophical level. It is interesting for me how the battle against clichés in Deleuze is always connected to the question of catastrophe. Whether it is a true catastrophe like World War II and all of the question of violence and so on, or an aesthetic catastrophe. If you, I don't know if it has been translated into Spanish yet. In France, Deleuze classes in Vincennes, the seminars he gave, are being published by David Lafourchade at the publisher. I know it's translated a few months later in English. I don't know what the situation is in Spain. But so the seminar about painting that Deleuze gave in 1980, I think, has been published 1.5 years ago. And Deleuze has this quote, it's the 5th one on your handout, where he talks about people who almost died. And he said, you can see in their eyes something. They've come so close to death that there is something so new and so good in their eyes, in their flesh. And he says it's a pity people get better and forget this state. And he jokes, if you don't often go to the clinics and hospitals, go and see people that just have been operated. But what I'm interested in that chapter is a kind of catastrophe that those bodies have encountered. And it's a knowledge of the flesh. Deleuze talks about the eyes, the flesh of people that who almost died. And this knowledge of the flesh that is so quickly forgotten, it is unreducible to logical knowledge. And that indicates why we need cinema and not only philosophy books. Cinema uses images and can talk to the flesh in a way a philosophy book cannot. And I'm really interested by all of those. As I said when I began this talk, what interests me in the sentence, the modern fact is that we no longer believe in this world, is that we get it. We get it when we read the sentence, but we cannot explain it analytically at first. I'm really interested by this instinctive understanding, the knowledge of the flesh that exceeds analytical and logical and rational knowledge. And for me, that's what Deleuze means when he talks about believing in this world. Belief is a mode of thought and of existence that is unreducible to rational knowledge, but as inheritors of modern philosophy, we are at loss to conceptualize that because modern philosophy equated knowledge and thought. And Deleuze is really clear about that in his 1984 seminars in Vincennes when he was teaching and preparing the writing of the time image. He really tells the student, since Hume, modern philosophy is based on the equation thought equals knowledge. And he says, in the second preface to the Critique of Pure Reason, Kant saw the problem. There is a sentence where Kant says, I had to abolish knowledge to make room for belief, faith, Glaube in German. And Deleuze comments and says, yeah, Kant opens up something, but it is Kant, and it is a critique of pure reason, so he tried to close it as fast as possible, but that's the history of modern and contemporary philosophy for you. We inherit this equation, thought equals knowledge, but we feel that it's not sufficient, that there are power of thought that exceeds knowledge, but we are ill-equipped to talk about it philosophically because that's our whole philosophical heritage there. So, philosophically, if we come back to the letter to Serge Danet, turning to modern cinema and its new function of the image is making room for thought that is not knowledge, that is belief. And belief is a power of thought, but we are not used to see it anymore. So it's a really simple idea, but it's so complicated to fully grasp rationally. And I think that's why in What is Philosophy, and that should be quote 6 on the handout, yes it is. Deleuze and Guattari, when they talk about believing in this world, because that's a theme that comes back in What is Philosophy, published in 1991. When they talk about believing in this world, Deleuze and Guattari will talk about modes of existence. And I think they they talk about the modes of existence of people who live in this world and people who don't believe in this world, and they say the most difficult task we have is believing in this world and invent new modes of existence that allow us to truly inhabit this world and not always dreaming of the future that will solve our problem, but believing in this world. It is our most difficult task, and it is a matter of modes of existence. And I think they speak of it in terms of mode of existence, because if we just talk about it in terms of knowledge, we are doomed. We don't understand it because we equate so closely knowledge and thought that we are unable to understand that there are other modes of thought. So mode of existence is more pragmatic. And I would argue, because in the book, Deleuze is my main author, obviously, but I also rely a bit on William James and his pragmatism that is not absent from Deleuze's books, even if it's not a lot of pages. I like the idea by James that some of our concepts and abstraction makes the world thicker and more interesting and worth it, like believing in this world, for instance. And some of our ideas and abstraction are derealizator. Those are ideas that make the world less dull, less interesting. And for James, those are the scientist ideas. You know, the small phrase or ritournelle, yeah, you believe that you can expect so much that your actions have an impact, but it's only, you know, your hormones talking, or it's only your bias. You're insignificant, basically. So for William James, some ideas give more richness and consistency to the world, and all other derealize the world and make it less interesting and less worth it. And James says you are right to believe in thicker ideas or in it's so hard to pronounce in English, derealizatrice ideas. He says in any case you are right to believe them because you will act according to your ideas. So if you think there is some changes to implement in this world, you will act accordingly and create the conditions for changes in the world. If you think the world is but an illusion and we are all doomed and any resistance is futile, you will be right, because you will act accordingly and make the world a less worth it place. So that's a matter of mode of existence. Here we really see how what you believe has an impact on your modes of existence, and your philosophical approach to the world has an impact on how you will revolt or not. So the new function of image Deleuze alludes to in the letter to Sardanet is to open us to other powers of thought that are irreducible to knowledge. And that's why we need film and cinema and movie, because we need to get outside of analytical thought as it has been formatted by modern philosophy to get grasped by images that offer us new modes of existence exceeding logical thought. So I'm talking too much. So the last, remember, we had a new artistic finality, a new function of image, and a new politics for modern cinema coming back from the dead. So about the new politics, I'll be really quick. I will just say when we can talk about it later. When we wonder what is the new politics of modern cinema in the goes, people who have read Cinema 2 will say, but it's obvious. There is the last part of chapter 8 of Cinema 2 is about fabulation, and the title of this part is Cinema and Politics. So we know where to look for if we wonder what is the politics of modern cinema. And here I say, no, not so fast. Fabulation, when you look at the pages in Cinema 2 where Deleuze talks about fabulation, I won't go into the specifics now, he only speaks about movie makers from in the 80s, what is called the third world, but so cinematographers from formerly colonized countries. And that's by design. Fabulation for Deleuze in Cinema 2 is reserved to formerly or recently colonized people. And he says it really, really clearly at the very beginning of this last part of chapter 8 of Cinema 2. And it's not in the handout, so I repeat it. Quote, in short, if there were a modern political cinema, it would be on this basis: the people no longer exist, or not yet. The people is missing. No doubt, this truth also applied to the West, but very few others discovered it because it was hidden by the mechanisms of power and the systems of majority. On the other hand, it was absolutely clear in the third world, where oppressed and exploited nations remained in a state of perpetual minorities, in a collective identity crisis. End quote. And what I find really interesting is that a lot of people have written about fabulation in Deleuze, but as if it were a political tool in any art, anywhere, at any time. But when you have this quote in mind, Deleuze is really clear that fabulation is for formerly or recently colonized people. And he says maybe that's true for the West, but almost nobody sees it. So the new politics Deleuze writes about in his letter to Serge Danet, we cannot just say it is fabulation, because cinema has to come back from the dead also in the West, and fabulation is not the answer of Western cinema. So to sum it up, and have some time to give you an insight of the chapters, because I'm just talking about the introduction to my book right now. To sum it up, I think that if we pay close attention to the two chapters of Cinema 2 about philosophy and cinema, so chapter 7 and chapter 8, and to the structure of those chapters, fabulation is a political answer, but only for the third world countries, if we use the phrasing of the 80s. And the politics of modern Western cinema is to be found in this gesture of believing in this world. And it means that it is not a politics that can be elaborated at a rational level only, but it is a matter of affect. And we have talked a lot about affects. I don't understand Spanish, but when the words are identical, it's easier. It is a matter of affect and of a kind of. My point is the new politics from modern Western cinema is an affective politics. It's a politics of affects. And it is quite clear if you go back to the first quote of the handout. We do not even believe in the events which happen to us, love, death, at least they only have concern us. Well, love and death, that's the most, the affect at their most, at their utmost power. And my reading, really, I'm contacting my thought here, but my reading of the new politics Deleuze writes about is it is only a politics of affects. When I'm talking about affects, I'm talking with Deleuzian sense, so we are not talking about the made for social media attention grabbing emotion, but true Spinozist affects that came from the outside and go through us. But I think that's the only thing Deleuze writes about when he writes about cinema. How we encounter love, death, accident, disasters that totally change us. And I find it quite interesting because for me, once you try to understand living in this world and coming back from the dead through the lens of a politics of affects, it works really well and it seems quite obvious. But philosophers are so used to be afraid of sentimentality that they don't see it. And for anecdote, when I was writing my book, I submitted an article to a journal about this. And at some point, I really wrote a paraphrase of Deleuze about affects. And one of the reviewers of the article said, well, that reviewer had really interesting and relevant comments, but said, oh, and that sentence should be removed if it's too cheesy. I said, but it's not my sentence. I'm really paraphrasing Deleuze, and there is a note attesting to it. So even a specialist of Deleuze, if you quote some sentences from Deleuze without the quotation marks, will tell you, no, that's not serious, it's cheesy. And it's Deleuze. Deleuze has, in my opinion, not that cheesy approach, but pays attention to the affective dimension of the cinematic experience and not only its logical determination. And I think we often miss that when we are discussing Deleuze and cinema, and that's really a pity because for me that's the heart of modern cinema's politics. And here you can also get the importance of connecting believing in this world and coming back from the dead, because we too, you know, existential and everyday lives, we don't want to seem too cheesy. We are afraid of the power of affect. So coming back from the dead is opening up to the power of affects. it's both a political and an existential question if we don't want to be living dead, basically. So we are at the end of the comments of one sentence in the letter to Ferdinand, the new politics of modern cinema when it comes back from the dead is a politics of affects and assuming that we are filming and we are seeing and watching movies from an affective standpoint. So I talk a lot, so maybe I will not go into the details of the chapters of my book and just give you some keywords, and if you are interested in a particular chapter, we can talk about it in the Q&A. Because for all those of you who have been here since yesterday morning, I imagine you must be quite tired. So in my first chapter, I turn to a movie by François Truffaut, because to change forward from Godard, movie from François Truffaut, La Chambre Verte, the Green Room, and to classic by Frank Capra, It's a Wonderful Life. And it's a chapter about how modern cinema shows us characters indebted in both literal economic sense and meaning, but also in an existential meaning. And how that is true for the characters that you see in the movies, but that's the story of cinema itself. You have a sentence by Deleuze in Cinema 2 when he says that the inferno of making movies, you need money for 1 minute of film, you need a minute of film in exchange of money, and it's never ending, except, as Fellini said, the movie will end when we don't have money anymore. So you have really this ontological exchange of time for money that is, and I'm quoting Deleuze, the integral conspiracy inherent to cinema. So that's chapter 1. Chapter 2 is big deal, because it is a chapter about Alain Resnais, and as we discussed earlier, for Deleuze, Resnais is the filmmaker that brings cinema back from the dead. So I won't go into the details now, but let's just say that Resnais is really interesting because, yeah, you have kind of like Lazare. How do we say that in Spanish? Lazarus. You know the man who comes back from the dead in the Bible. Lazarus. So if you pay close attention to Resnais' movies, it is full of Lazarus. People who go through a death, a kind of death, and then come back but change. So that's interesting in the frame of my book. And in addition to that, Resnais is really identified with the whole brain movies and the question of the world brain and so on. So basically, that's a chapter where I argue that the brain movies made by Resnais don't exclude bodies and affects at all, but are aiming to make the brain not the object or subjected to experiments anymore. And when I say subjected to experiments, I have in mind Brouillard, Night and Fog, the documentary about the death camps in World War II. But that's the beginnings of René, United Frog. But even if in its fictional movies you have this idea of humans reduced to being subjected to experiments, it's quite clear in Mon Oncle d'Amérique, my American uncle, for instance. So what I argue is that while René shows us characters reduced, subjected to being mere objects of experiment, what his movies are doing is creating not subjects anymore, but super-yets, which is a Whiteheadian word that Deleuze and Guattari use towards the end of his philosophy. So if we play with etymology, a sub-yet is pre-existent and submitted to what will happen to it, while a super-yet is what I am aiming for, so the process of becoming, basically. And I argue that you can read, you can see and understand and feel René's cinema as an attempt to transform the brain and the bodies to not be subject of experiment, they would say algorithmic experiment, for instance, but how can movies and cinema make them super-yet and engage them in becoming processes? So that's for chapter 2. So let's say, because I don't want to speak for more than 1 hour, chapter 3 and 4 are about 2 TV series, because I think, well, Deleuze wrote The Tiny Age in 1985, but when you're writing almost 40 years later, when we talk about images that at a mass mediatic level touch people and touch us, we have to talk about series, both the fact that the majority of TV series today are bad and pre-formatted according to the marketing perspective in what people with money think we want to see. But as Deleuze said in the 80s, of course, the majority of cinematic production is bad, but there is still so much to say about the 1% that resists. I argue that is true for TV series as well, and so in chapter 3 I focus on I have really taste in TV series, so I focus on a HBO series that is called The Leftovers, and that is about impossible grief, to say it really quickly, with 2% of the world population evaporating, really disappearing, just like that. You could say, at a meta level, by a move of camera, people were there and then they disappear, and we don't know where they go. It's not death, it's something else, hence the impossible grief for the leftovers, the 98% who stay there, but in a world that doesn't make any sense anymore, because how can you believe in anything if I could just evaporate in the middle of my sentence? And theologians and politicians will tell you we don't have any answer and explanation to that. Scientists don't have any explanation to that. So I talked about this TV series and the powers of the false. It's a way for me to revisit the power of the false chapter of Cinema 2. And in the fourth and last chapter of the book, I talk about Station 11, which is a beautiful miniseries based on a novel by Canadian author Emily St. Mendel. And I say this unironically. It's this book, Station 11, is a great gift for birthdays. So I don't have any idea. For me, it always works. People are always very happy to read it because it's a post-apocalyptic book, but it's not your usual post-apocalyptic world where you're fighting for survival and everything is awful and you will get killed or enslaved. It's a book about what happens 20 years after a swine flu erases 90.9% of humanity. But there are people still there, and notably a troupe of actors and musicians who go around the Great Lake region in North America every year to play Shakespeare and to play music with a motto, a device that comes from Star Trek, because after the end of the world, you don't distinguish between high-bro culture and popular culture. And the motto is survival is insufficient. So I won't go deep into my viewing of Station 11, but let's say that it's not depressing post-apocalyptic world. It's a post-apocalyptic world you could want to live in, but it's still realistic and all the characters are traumatized. And I reflect on this question of trauma to give a new reading of the crystal image, which is an image we talked about it earlier, and it is always commented on a lot, but I think that sometimes people are so fascinated by the beauty of the concept, the crystal image, that we miss the point. Deleuze makes clearly that the crystal only retains depth. That's the object of the last quote of your handout, by the way. That crystals are only interesting if they are broken, if there is a line of light somewhere. But if you stay in the crystal, of course, it's seducing to say you can go from one place to another, from the present to the past, from the actual to the virtual. It's seducing, but you're trapped in this infernal circuit, and it's the same. What I said earlier about the internal conspiracy of cinema, time for money, money for time. It's one of the infernal crystal image for Deleuze. So the crystal is a trap, and you have to prove yourself into it to escape it. But the crystal is only worth it if you get out of it. And if you wish, we can discuss it further, but it was interesting to work on that idea with the series Station 11 because it shows actors playing characters. So you have a beautiful crystal here, and those people are traumatized by the end of the world. And the specificity of trauma is when you are traumatized, you don't have memories distinct from your present. You relive your trauma always as it is, as if it were happening right now. There is no clear distinction between the present and the past. And so it's a crystal. You cannot distinguish between past and present, and you need to find your way out of the crystal that is a trap to get out. So, yeah, the fact that in Station 11 you have post-traumatic component and the filming of actors, playing characters, having dreams. We really have a lot of mise en avis. Let's say it in French, because I'm trusting you 100%. But so, yeah, Station 11 was really interesting to rework the crystal image concept with those components of the crystal, and showing that we shouldn't be fascinated by the crystal image. We should use it as a way to prove ourselves in our links to cinema, but to get out of the crystal, come back from the dead, and live in this world. And I should have done.
Thank you very much. Tenemos un ratillo para preguntas, comentarios. Pueden ser en inglés, en francés, right? English, French questions, I can translate.
Yeah, and Spanish if you translate.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I just speak words.
Well, I have a question. Thank you, Aline, for the presentation of your book in public here in Madrid. So one of the main terms in the book is that can you go deeper with this notion, because philosophically, death, particularly in the cinema studies, has a real gravitation, right? Death, like in Pasolinian, is the relation to the montage, la mort, el montage. Ciertas relaciones, that relation is I think, ontological approach to the notion of death. But there is another approximation that is historical notion of death that I think is the notion of the use of death that makes the less, when he says resigner, come back from the dead cinema. So I think that notion of death is more historically made. That's because I asked you to this notion of death, particularly if you go deeper.
Yeah, well, it's a multi-layered notion, and so in the book I assume the fact that they have an angle that goes towards this idea that we are acting like zombies in the middle of cliches, but you have a whole lot of layers of signification. You have André Bazin, who is an important reference for Deleuze, who has a canonical text about the ontology of cinematographical images. And basically, Bazin says from the onset, you know, the legend by Pliny about the origin of painting. It's always a question of the fiancé will go to war and die, and make an image to keep him alive. And Bazin says that's the whole quest of humanity with images, is to find a way to keep the absent present. So it's always a matter of life and death. And Bazin says cinema accomplishes the fate of image and find ways of keeping alive even in their movements. So you have that ontological layer. You have a really historical determination, and that's particularly clear in the exchanges between Deleuze and Danet. So there is this letter that serves as a preface to one of Danet's books, but Deleuze and Danet really wed each other closely, and you can spot ideas from Dane in Deleuze and ideas from Deleuze in Dane. And in their conversation, it is quite clear that Deleuze comments Dane and adds to it, saying classical cinema is the moment image its depth and hidden place, and you can get out of the image. Dane says that's literally the idea when we talk about happy ends to classical movies. You can get out of it. If you have a happy end, it means you could get out of the fiction the movie was showing you. And the next says, modern cinema, if you think about, well, Night and Fog is a good example. Images are just a plane, they don't have depth anymore. You cannot get out of it. The whole world is the image of the massacre and the violence and the dead from World War II, and the question cinema asked from its viewer at the time is not how to get out of it, but can you watch this image that is in front of you anyway? And then they adds, and some movie makers have a tendency to forget that, they add, okay, that was really important in the 50s, in the early 60s, to show those images without depth and to face the dead and the atrocities from World War II, but the other wars as well. But at some point, Daniel says, always showing violence and asking spectators, can you handle this? Can you watch this? At what point it's not political anymore, it becomes hysteria. So we have to invent a third age of the image. So yes, there is a historical determination of the connection between cinema and death, and in the Deleuze and Dane dialogue, it is really that period of cinema after World War II, with an image that is just a surface and you cannot get out of it. But and yeah, it has a historical determination, and we cannot do exactly the same later on. I'm expanding on that because from what I understood of the dialogue we had during those 2 days, the question of history in Deleuze talks about cinema is important. So
apparemment en français. Mais je crois aussi que l'importance de Alain René, c'est parce que les documentaires qu'il fait sont connectés au présent. Parce qu'à la fin de Nuevo, il fait la connexion avec le présent et aussi avec les statuts mères aussi, il fait la connexion avec le présent. Et c'est là, je crois que c'est très important. Dans les dialogues de Deleuze et Dane, il y a aussi, je ne sais pas comment le dire, un élément générationnel, un élément par la différence d'âge, parce que pour Dane, Nuit de brouillard a été la manière de savoir qu'est-ce qui s'est passé. Nuit de brouillard, le but était un peu la découverte. Et par Deleuze, était un peu la constatation. Deleuze était aussi impliqué pour le dire, pas seulement historiquement, mais personnellement. Mais pour l'année, et Nuevo était un peu la découverte. Je crois que tous les mots, nous savons quelque chose, un roman, un film, quelque chose qui t'a fait quelque chose dans la tête. Maintenant, je commence à être un adulte. Et pour l'année, c'était un peu la découverte de l'histoire récente et aussi les films qu'il avait fait dans la tête. Et je crois que dans René, il y a quelque chose qui était intéressant. Et dans un certain moment, René il commence à faire un peu de fiction. À la fin, il a fait pendant des années avec une grande implication formelle, implication intellectuelle, implication historique. À la fin, il commence, je vais faire des fictions. Et c'est ce moment que je crois que va les situer un peu plus dans René. Et Godard va les situer un peu plus avec le néo-réalisme, avec Rossellini. Beaucoup plus que Deleuze. Et Godard va insister sur le rôle de Pardon, c'est un peu une débarration.
Oui, est-ce que c'est plus facile si je réponds en français ou en anglais? Ok, en français? Oui, alors, quand même, pour prendre en compte la fatigue de tout le monde, j'ai la citation 7, Seven, du handout, qui est vraiment Deleuze qui parle des fictions de René, en disant ça représente toujours des personnages philosophes, c'est-à-dire, enfin, pas des acteurs qui jouent à être des philosophes, mais des personnages qui viennent d'une mort et qui retournent vers une autre mort, et la vie, c'est cet éclair qui se passe entre deux. Donc, je vais juste rebondir sur certains aspects de ce que vous avez dit. Oui, alors il y a déjà une chose à avoir en tête avec René, c'est que c'est exactement la même génération que la nouvelle vague, mais c'est pas partie de la nouvelle vague, c'est un autre type de cinéma. Et je trouve que c'est très important d'avoir en tête les courts-métrages et les documentaires de René quand on lit Deleuze commentant les fictions de René, parce qu'en fait, tout est en germe dans les documentaires et ça va être réinvesti complètement autrement dans les fictions. Dans le livre, je commente des fictions, mais on a besoin des documentaires pour les comprendre. Et Nuit et brouillard, ça commence, c'est un collègue de Montpellier qui a vu ça, Vincent Deville. Nuit et brouillard, ça commence par des plans sur des mauvaises herbes et des herbes qui ont une couleur un peu glauque. Et c'est l'herbe qui repousse, mais littéralement sur les charniers en fait. Mais vraiment, ça commence comme ça, et avec le commentaire sur l'herbe à repousser, sur les herbes. Et puis, il y a un cut, image en noir et blanc, accession d'Hitler au pouvoir dans les années 30. Et bon, vous avez le gros du documentaire qui documente les atrocités nazies. Et à la toute fin, on revient à, effectivement, le présent du film, en tout cas, avec les ruines des camps d'extermination et les herbes qui ont repoussé, mais ces herbes sont inquiétantes et étranges. Et si vous faites attention à ce que dit la voix off, et c'est un rescapé des camps qui a écrit le texte de Nuit et brouillard, ce que dit la voix off, c'est tout comme ces herbes qui reviennent et qui semblent un peu menaçantes, prenez garde à croire que tout ça n'a eu qu'un seul lieu et un seul temps. La barbarie, c'est une mauvaise herbe qui menace toujours. Et un des derniers films de René s'appelle Les herbes folles, et c'est une pure fiction, ça ne parle pas du tout d'histoire, ça ne parle pas du tout de politique. C'est un homme bien sous tout rapport qui en fait est un tueur en série. C'est toujours cette barbarie, et c'est traité sous le mode plutôt comédie. Mais il y a toujours ce petit truc menaçant, la mauvaise herbe, c'est vraiment cette barbarie qui peut repousser n'importe quand et n'importe où. Et vous avez un peu ça dans tous les films de Danae, même quand c'est de la comédie. Il y a ce truc un peu menaçant, il y a cette question de qu'est-ce qu'on fait de nos vies, d'où le mal peut venir. Et c'est toujours un peu connecté à des thèmes qui ont pu être abordés, parfois même de manière légère, dans les documentaires qu'il a fait au début de sa carrière de cinéaste. Cette idée du cerveau-monde, du World Nuevo, c'est très prosaïque à la base pour René. Il a fait un documentaire sur la Bibliothèque nationale de France qui s'appelle Toute la mémoire du monde. Vous trouvez le documentaire assez facilement sur YouTube. Il y a Chris Marker aussi qui a collaboré au documentaire. Et il montre vraiment la Bibliothèque nationale de France comme une espèce de cerveau à l'échelle de la Terre où il y a une lutte sans fin pour empêcher la destruction des ressources qui sont entreposées à la bibliothèque, avec cette idée que peut-être qu'un jour, tous les parties, tous les petits cerveaux des gens qui vont commander un livre pour la table de lecture de la DNF, si on les met ensemble, ils arriveront à une utopie, on ne comprend pas trop si c'est une utopie ou une dystopie. Mais oui, cette idée du cerveau-monde que Deleuze reprend dans Cinéma 2 en disant, c'est ce dont Antonio parlait hier soir, est-ce qu'on va participer à la crétinisation du monde avec les vidéoclips de MTV, ou est-ce qu'on va arriver à faire des courts-circuits, à créer de nouveaux lobes? C'est pas seulement une métaphore, c'est vraiment toutes les infrastructures de stockage des livres, des informations, etc. Ça fait un cerveau-monde. Et est-ce qu'on va juste se soumettre aux chemins les plus empruntés dans le cerveau-monde, ou est-ce qu'on va arriver à créer des nouveaux courts-circuits? C'est la question de René dans ses documentaires les plus politiques, comme dans ses fictions, a priori les plus dégagées dans le jeu politique immédiat, mais qui sont toujours hantées par ces questions qui naissent des courts-métrages qu'il a fait dans les années 50 avant de commencer à faire des fictions.
Estaba Juan Evaristo un segundo.
Yo estoy en la línea de Nicolás sobre la cuestión de
Bueno.
Es una
Gracias.
pero porque es muy interesante, no, voy a decir en francés, ¿no? Sí, okay. C'est très intéressant, en fait, je trouve qu'en fait, il y a les morts et un cinéma mort, non? Et ce cinéma mort qui revient des morts, c'est ça ce qui se passe. Donc, le cinéma est aussi mort. Non seulement il y a des morts et le cinéma qui revient, le cinéma lui-même est mort. Et en fait, cette traduction, cette traduction anglaise est très très mauvaise.
Oui, la traduction anglaise
c'est très très mauvaise. En fait, ça c'est il faut préciser. Donc, this form of cinema didn't die a natural death, but was killed in the war. En français, c'était ce cinéma n'est pas mort tout seul, mais la guerre l'a assassiné. Donc, este cinema no murió a solas, pero la guerra lo asesinó. Y entonces, no. Mais déjà, ça, j'aimerais bien savoir comment tu situes la mort de ce cinéma parmi les morts desquels ce cinéma doit revenir.
Ben, je crois que c'est vraiment la question du médium, et c'est pour ça que je disais dans la lettre à Serge Danet, c'est très clair que bon, il y a eu ce gros moment où là, il y a un peu consensus pour dire tout cas chez les Deleuziens. Pour dire, ok, bon, il y a une mort du cinéma classique, le cinéma moderne qui s'invente derrière et qui est une manière de revenir d'entre les morts, de se réinventer sur de nouvelles bases, et en même temps, c'est une menace permanente sur le cinéma. Si on comprend sa mort comme un assassinat par compromission avec l'époque présente, et le cinéma qui cesse d'être une force créative qui résiste et qui devient juste des films Marvel, aujourd'hui, c'est vraiment une tâche absolument de tous les instants du cinéma, de revenir d'entre les morts, de ne pas se laisser réduire. Donc il y a cet aspect-là, qui est l'aspect le plus évident, enfin le plus clair, sur lequel insiste la lettre à Serge Danet. Et moi, quand j'écrivais mon livre, comme je suis entourée d'amis et d'amis à Toulouse qui sont en études cinématographiques, eux, quand on parle de mort du cinéma, ils lèvent les yeux au ciel en disant « Oh non, pas encore cette question ». Donc ça m'intéressait de montrer qu'il faut connecter les deux. Il y a la question de la pertinence du médium. Est-ce que le médium arrive encore à créer ou est-ce qu'il se laisse tuer par les clichés de l'époque? Et il y a aussi ce que travaille le médium dans sa narration, dans sa mise en image, qui est notre rapport aux autres morts. Je n'ai pas eu le temps d'en parler en détail ici, mais dans mon dernier chapitre sur Station 11, ce qui m'a beaucoup intéressé aussi avec cette série, c'est que elle est partie en pré-production en 2019. Donc ça parle d'une grippe qui a fait mourir 99,9% de l'humanité, sur base d'un roman qui est sorti en 2014. Il commence à filmer fin 2019, début 2020. Il s'attend à ce que ce soit une des séries prestige d'HBO, qui pour une série prestige a quand même un bon public vu comment le roman avait marché. Et puis il y a le Covid qui arrive. Pendant un an, ils arrêtent de filmer, ils reprennent le tournage, et la série sort sur HBO Max en décembre 2021, janvier 2022, donc pile pendant la vague Omicron. Et il y a eu toute une flopée d'articles disant si la série n'a pas rencontré son public, c'est parce que les gens n'en peuvent plus des pandémies, quoi. Et le premier épisode, ça montre une pandémie qui déboule, et évidemment, l'épisode a été écrit avant le Covid. Donc, il faut montrer ce que c'est un confinement, quoi. Et en fait, moi, dans le livre, je dis, je suis pas d'accord avec ça. Je pense pas que c'est parce que les gens en avaient marre d'entendre parler de pandémie qu'ils n'ont pas regardé Station 11. Parce qu'en fait, c'est que le premier épisode. Après, ça se passe 20 ans plus tard. Donc, franchement, ça va. Moi, j'ai vu le premier épisode pendant Omicron. Ça va. Je pense que si, au moment où la série est sortie, il y a moins de gens qu'escomptés qui l'ont vue, c'est parce qu'elle parle du trauma. Donc, finalement, une représentation cliché de la pandémie, on peut tout à fait regarder ça. Par contre, admettre qu'on est complètement traumatisé par ce qui nous est arrivé pendant le Covid, ça a longtemps été, et c'est encore un peu tabou. On a vécu ce moment absolument atroce pendant 1 ou 2 ans. Certains n'en sont pas revenus, d'autres connaissent des gens qui en sont morts, certains ont perdu leur emploi, certains ont perdu leur mode de vie. Enfin, on a été traumatisés, le mot n'est pas trop fort. Mais dès qu'on a pu enlever les masques, ou même dès qu'on a pu sortir de chez nous avec des masques, il y avait un peu une injonction à faire comme si de rien n'était, à ne pas parler de ce qui nous est arrivé, des moments, pour le coup, de sidération totale qu'on a traversé seul chez nous au début du confinement. Donc, je me suis perdue par rapport à ta question initiale, mais il me semble que, voilà, il y a à la fois la mort du médium, mais il y a aussi tout ce que le médium permet de montrer et tout ce que la série télé permet d'explorer. Et il me semble que Station 11, ça permet d'explorer vraiment le rapport au traumatisme comme étant ce que pendant assez longtemps, on n'a pas été capable de vouloir regarder parce que nous-mêmes, dans le déni de notre propre traumatisme, on ne va pas regarder une série qui parle beaucoup plus de trauma qu'elle ne parle de pandémie. C'est pas du tout le point de la série, la pandémie.
Ah, c'est un peu tard, je crois. Toute formule laisse tomber. Voilà.
Hay tiempo. Estamos descansados ya.
Non, c'est là.
Allez, merci beaucoup Aline, c'était super, des questions. D'abord, la question c'est qu'est-ce que signifie les mondes chez ton livre, avec vous. Et ça parce que quand on pense Derrida, la politique à venir, la démocratie à venir, etc., c'est toujours une pensée sur la fin du monde. Derrida, comme vous savez bien, prend ses gaz de Sénat, il vient, il se frotte, il se détrale. Et le monde est fini, Dieu doit le porter. Et pour arriver à cette idée, la fin du monde, c'est précisément la fin d'une certaine économie, d'un ordre établi. Et c'est cette fin qui permet, disons, la demande infinie de l'éthique, la politique, etc. Ça, c'est derrière. Alors, c'est toujours dans les derniers séminaires, etc., que Derrida réfléchit sur la fin du monde et sur ce qui vient après le monde. Lui, il a aussi cette idée de chaque chronique, la fin du monde, quand une personne meurt, c'est la fin du monde, etc. Et alors, c'est pour ça que m'a étonné, même si j'ai dit, cette idée de revenir au monde, de penser au monde, d'avoir foi dans le monde. Alors ça, c'est une question, qu'est-ce que ça veut dire le monde? Et peut-être un peu maréchal avec cette idée de monde. Et l'autre question, c'est à propos de la politique de sa fête. Parce qu'on dirait d'abord que le capitalisme fait déjà ça. Le capitalisme a une couche affective qui propose toujours une économie affective et qui a à voir avec l'estrée, l'enthousiasme, des valeurs familiaristes, etc. Mais quand même, il y a une économie affective que le capitalisme mobilise, notamment sur le média, sur le cinéma, etc. Alors, je suis très d'accord et avec l'idée que ce cinéma qui réalise des morts doit porter sur une politique de sa fête. Moi, je demande quel genre de politique, comment penser dans les termes de comment penser une affect plus fort et de signer contraire que cette affectivité qui porte le capitalisme, qui génère des rapports de compétition, d'héroïsme, de narcissisme. Alors, c'est ça, mais merci beaucoup, j'ai bien aimé.
Merci. Alors, j'ai un moyen de répondre rapidement, parce qu'évidemment, on pourrait passer des heures, c'est quoi le
Ouais, c'est pour cela que
mais j'ai un moyen de répondre rapidement, que j'avais sauté, donc ça tombe bien. Puisque cette idée si on accepte de connecter, croire en ce monde avec revenir entre les morts, puisque ça nous met dans le dialogue Deleuze-Danet. En fait, Danet a fait un entretien de 3 heures avec Régis Debray, mais qui est très chouette, qui s'appelle Itinéraire d'un cinéphile. Donc Danet revient sur sa vie, ce qu'il a fait aimer le cinéma, son rapport au cinéma, etc. Et il dit dans cet entretien que quand il était enfant, Danet était homosexuel, il est mort du sida, c'était à l'époque où il insistait pour qu'on dise qu'il était mort du sida, parce qu'il y avait encore un tabou là-dessus. Mais donc Danet, il n'était pas à sa place, il ne se sentait pas à sa place dans la cour de récréation avec les autres petits garçons qui jouent au foot. Et il dit, la naissance de ma cinéphilie, c'est vraiment d'avoir été au cinéma, voir tous les films qui sortaient. Et il dit, moi, j'ai jamais aimé la science-fiction ou les films d'évasion. C'est toujours des films réalistes, dans un sens très large, qui m'ont intéressé. Mais ce qu'il dit, alors, je vais lire, désolé, c'est bête, du coup, j'ai une citation en français que ici, je l'ai traduite en anglais. Bon, je vais essayer de me refaire une... Et quand il parle à Régis Debray, il dit « Je pense que le monde est formidable comme il est, et je pense que c'est formidable qu'on ait laissé l'habiter. » Mais c'était l'idée, donc quand il était gamin et qu'il allait au cinéma, nous aurons ce monde et nous pourrons finalement l'habiter. C'est l'essence de ma cinéphilie. Nous pourrons finalement habiter le monde. Mais nous habiterons le monde et pas la société, jamais. De la société, on ne peut s'attendre qu'à des choses terribles. Et j'aime beaucoup cette distinction monde-société. La société, c'est le régime capitaliste de production, des clichés qui préformatent, il n'y a aucune nouveauté possible, il faut s'adapter. Donc la société, c'est l'hégémonie, quoi, et le règne des clichés hégémoniques. Le monde, c'est cet espace de création qui peut être investi dans le désir. Alors, contrairement à Deleuze, Danet dialogue aussi avec la pensée de Lacan, et il dit le monde, c'est ce qui peut faire l'objet d'un désir, tandis que la société, elle tient le désir bien, enfin, les formats, quoi, les désirs. Le monde peut faire l'objet d'un désir ouvert. Donc, pour la fatigue de fin de journée de colloque, évidemment, on pourrait parler pendant 3 heures de ce que veut dire le monde, mais je trouve que cette distinction société-monde de Danet est assez parlante. Et après, bah, évidemment, c'est pour ça que les 2 séries dont je parle, c'est des séries qui traitent de fin du monde. Là, on peut rajouter plein de choses avec, quand on parle de monde. Chez les modernes, au sens latorien, on parle toujours aussi de fin du monde, clairement. Et sur la deuxième question, oui, je suis consciente que il y a déjà, alors c'est pour ça que les distinctions précises de Deleuze entre affect, affection, émotion sont utiles. Si on veut faire le deleuzien précis, les grandes politiques majoritaires, algorithmiques, le capitalisme de l'attention, etc., est basé sur une politique des émotions et pas des affects. Si on prend l'affect au sens spinoziste, c'est un événement rare, ça arrive très rarement. Et donc, il n'y a pas de recette pour dire ce serait quoi un cinéma qui met en place une politique des affects. Il n'y a pas de recette, on ne peut pas le définir a priori. Il faut voir les films qui font monter en nous une puissance d'affect. Mais il n'y a pas de définition a priori, sinon par la négative en fait. C'est pas ce qui reproduit les schémas, le soap opéra, la musique tire l'arbre qui arrive pour t'indiquer que là, il faut pleurer, que c'est triste. C'est vraiment les films, pour reprendre des termes qu'on utilisait tout à l'heure, qui créent de nouveaux courts-circuits, des nouveaux lobes dans le cerveau monde, et qui font lever une puissance d'affect. Et Bellatar, qu'on voyait tout à l'heure, c'est un super exemple de ça. Enfin, oui, il y a une nouvelle connexion cheval, vent, etc. C'est une nouvelle puissance d'affect. Et il n'y a pas de définition ou de cas, c'est propre d'un vrai affect qui se lève. Il n'y a pas de cas ou de définition préexistant à la proposition cinématographique. C'est à expérimenter avec l'image.
The final point, I think it's very, very challenging when you say that when we hear the term politics in the mouth from the mouth of the Deleuze, we don't go to the chapter 8 on fabulation, but I think this is very challenging. I love it, but I think it's a mistake. But I can't explain why I think it's a mistake. Just I want to say that what is the politics of affect? Affect from the ethics. It's not politics. I think this is my general argumentation actually. I think that yes, yesterday. Affecto, affectio, etc. That those things all come from ethics, not from politics. So I think this is my individual problem, maybe this kind of confusion between politics and ethics, especially in the contemporary political philosophy. And I find the same thing in your presentation today. This is a little bit what I want to say. And so, but I think you mentioned physically the quotation mark that Deleuze put it here. No? How do you? So I wanna ask you a very light question. How did you interpret this quotation mark in this text?
Okay, so just to answer your objection before, I hear you. What makes me think the politics, quotation marks, of the new politics of cinema coming back from the dead has something to do with believing in this world and the affects connected to that. Is just after the passage I read to you earlier, so where Deleuze says none of these truths the people is missing also apply to the West, but very few others discovered it. Just after that, he quotes René. René and the Straub and Lumière are the two examples of Western cinematographers who saw that problem. So there are connections that we can do afterward. And about the, is it a matter of ethics or of politics? Affects in Spinoza are what improve or diminish my power to act. So if you have in mind the late text by Deleuze and Deleuze and Guattari and the question of modes of existence I alluded to in What is Philosophy, you can connect the question of modes of existence to affects and what improve or decrease my power of acting. So it's a pirouette, but to answer your question about the quotation marks around politics in the letter to Sardenet, it's not the usual political categories we are used to, and that's something really important actually in cinema too, the time image. And for me, it's the reason why Rancière was so upset about cinema too. It's that in just 2 or 3 pages, Deleuze said the old utopias of the society without class, or the American dream, it's all ended now. The people offered by the communist imaginary doesn't work for the modern Western people and cinema. I think that's why a lot of Marxist thinkers hated Deleuze at that point, because just in 2 pages it was like, oh no, that's an old problem from before the war. No, it doesn't work like that. That's not the politics we have to talk about. And I think the quotation marks are there to indicate, forget all you think you know about politics. If you're just going to reapply the same categories within, you'll end up in the same traps we always end up in. So yeah, I assume the provocative aspect of saying politics of affects, because it probably should be refined as an idea, but the point is to extract us from our habits and categories that have become modern when we think politically. how to think politically without using as base the category, you know, it's also a Latourian problem, but it's easy. Well, I'm tired, so maybe I'm exaggerating, but you know, it's easy to say capital, left, right, and to feel yourself good in a good position because you know you are on the right side of things and you are being critical, so you show it's the fault of capitalism and etc. And yeah, it's true, but what's the pragmatic impact of such discourse today? And sometimes you can argue there is no, we are just repeating the same categories. We feel smart. I'm basically paraphrasing an article by Latour. We feel smart. We, contrary to all the people, we are critical, but we have lost any direct power of action. We are just repeating the same old categories. So I think the quotation marks around politics is a way of saying it's not politics like we are used to talk about and think about. Even what politics means has to be reinvented. And it could go, it's my perspective, but I totally admit we should add a lot of perspectives around that, but it could go in the direction of the politics of affects without excluding other perspectives on the matter. But anyway, yeah, for me the quotation marks indicates we have to totally rethink what politics means.
Ya están las 2 horas.
Vamos brevísimo. Estamos hablando, lo digo primero en español, pero estamos hablando todo el tiempo de resurrección. Nous parlons tout le temps de resurrección. Et bizarrement, el más sabio es Yann Nicolas, l'histoire du cinéma. Yann Nicolas dit en 1945, 1945, l'image est mort. La imagen ha muerto el cine. Le cinéma est mort. Et l'image est mort. Et l'image viendra au temps de la résurrección. L'image viendra, c'est la verdadera significación de esa frase mystérieuse, l'image viendra au temps de la résurrección. No es misteriosa. L'image viendra au temps de la résurrection. Le cinéma moderne, la tâche du cinéma moderne est redonner la cohérence dans le monde, volver a dar creencia en el mundo es que vuelvan, es una cuestión de resurrección. La Sartre parmi nous, el roman de Jean Caillebotte, claro, es una muerte, les êtres humains mueren, la mort dans la mer, de la resignificación, como dit Nicolas, est la mort du cinéma. Nous parlons de la résurrection de l'image, de la résurrection du cinéma. Quoi que c'est ça?
Je pense que c'est un mix de tout et que c'est encore plus compliqué que ça. Parce que là, l'avantage sexualiste, c'est pas une thèse, c'est un essai. Donc j'ai pu me focaliser sur ce qui m'intéressait le plus. Et le livre n'a pas prétention à épuiser tous les sens de ce que veut dire chez Deleuze croire en ce monde et revenir entre les morts. Mais si j'avais dû écrire ce livre en mode thèse et aller explorer toutes les couches de signification, En fait, la phrase « le fait moderne, c'est que nous ne croyons plus en ce monde », ça vient juste après une discussion du cinéma chrétien. Donc, il y a de la vraie résurrection. On parle bien au sens chrétien du terme, avec quelqu'un qui meurt et puis qui revient dans son mort. Et il parle de Ordette de Dreyer. Vous avez vraiment l'épouse morte, tout le monde voit Ordette. Vous avez une vraie résurrection d'un personnage qui se prenait pour Jésus, puis qui, quand enfin il comprend qu'il n'est pas Jésus, devient capable d'agir comme un Christ contemporain. Sa belle-sœur est morte, elle est dans le cercueil, on s'apprête à parler du cercueil, il arrive et il résurrecte sa belle-sœur. Donc il y a quand même ce rapport, alors non seulement au cinéma chrétien, qui est proche de la phrase sur le fait moderne, c'est que nous croyons en ce monde, mais en plus, Deleuze, il ne dit pas seulement cinéma chrétien, il parle d'une certaine catholicité du cinéma. Et quand j'écrivais une première version du livre, j'ai une amie qui est russe orthodoxe, qui s'est énervée en disant catholicité, il n'y a pas que les catholiques qui ont un rapport à l'image et à la résurrection. Et depuis, c'est devenu une petite obsession. J'ai eu la chance d'avoir une doctorante qui a soutenu une thèse sur l'histoire du cinéma. Il y avait Antoine Debec, des cahiers du cinéma, qui était dans le jury, qui connaît très bien Godard, qui a écrit une biographie de Godard, qui a fait date. Et on en a parlé pendant le jury de thèse de l'image viendra au temps de la résurrection. Est-ce qu'il y a un rapport avec cette catholicité du cinéma dont parle Deleuze? Alors même que, en fait, Godard, il était protestant, enfin, il était suisse, mais Debec disait non, mais c'est intéressant parce que toute cette discussion, là, pour le coup, Deleuze-Godard, pour changer un peu de la discussion Deleuze-Valet, c'est la période de Je vous salue Marie. Et Marie, c'est une figure catholique. Donc, il y a vraiment un investissement par des athées de cette catholicité du cinéma. Et c'est vrai qu'il y a un rapport catholique aux images qui est très différent du rapport protestant aux images. Donc je pense que si on voulait fouiller tous les aspects de la résurrection, il faudrait aller dans cette direction, catholicité du cinéma et le rapport catholique aux images, qui est très distinct du rapport protestant ou orthodoxe, où ce sont une manière d'investir la chair des images dans le catholicisme, qu'on retrouve certainement pas dans le protestantisme et même pas dans les icônes orthodoxes. Il y aurait quelque chose à faire avec cette question-là, en plus de ce que tu soulignais aussi il y a le double sens, que ça c'est un peu partout quand Deleuze parle du cinéma, il parle à la fois du médium et de l'histoire du médium et de ce que le médium représente ou présente. Et ça, c'est quelque chose que j'essaye de garder, j'essaye de garder les deux bouts dans le livre aussi, de parler à la fois du cinéma comme médium, donc d'un point de vue formel, comment la forme évolue, et en même temps de prêter attention à ce qui est montré et aux histoires qui sont racontées et de montrer qu'on ne peut pas dissocier les deux pôles, le pôle formaliste, on va dire, et le pôle qu'est-ce qui est montré dans ce film précis. Mais c'est l'éternel débat, c'est aussi ce que Rancière reproche à Deleuze, de confondre ce qui est représenté avec le devenir du médium, mais à mon sens, il ne confond pas. C'est juste que c'est indissociable. Il y a une évolution du médium qui se reflète dans ce qui est montré dans le médium. Donc c'est la résurrection à la fois de ce qui est montré et du médium.
Ahora sí.
Vraiment.
Bueno, pues gracias.
Pero bueno.
Pero bueno.
Will be my comment. Pero bueno.
Bueno, mil gracias. Seguimos.
Muchas gracias.
Gracias.